Hannah Wright straightened her uniform for the 100th time, studying her reflection in the polished surface of the diplomatic chamber's wall. The United Earth government had chosen her for this historic moment, first official contact with the Zephyrian Empire, and she refused to let humanity down. The chamber's temperature dropped several degrees as the environmental systems adjusted to Zephyrian preferences. Hannah fought back a shiver, reminding herself that this was just one of many adaptations they'd make to accommodate their extraterrestrial guests. Delegate approaching, the AI announced, its voice eerily calm considering the magnitude of the moment. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a tall, elegant figure that seemed to float rather than walk. Kven, the Zephyrian diplomatic representative, moved with an otherworldly grace that immediately captured Hannah's attention. Their silvery skin caught the light like morning frost, while patterns of bioluminescent markings pulsed gently across their exposed arms and neck, a trait Hannah knew indicated emotional states in their species. "Welcome to Earth Station 1, Hannah said, careful to maintain the prescribed 4-meter distance. The briefing materials had been explicit about Zephyrian customs regarding physical proximity. "I am Diplomatic Officer Hannah Wright, your assigned liaison for the duration of your stay." Kven's head tilted slightly, multifaceted eyes studying Hannah with an intensity that made her heart race. "Your hospitality honors us," they responded, their voice carrying a musical quality that the translation software couldn't quite filter out. "Though I must correct your address, I am male, according to your binary classification system." Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "I apologize for the assumption." The briefing materials were unclear on Zephyrian gender expression. "No offense is taken," Kven assured her, the patterns on his skin shifting to what Hannah hoped was an amused configuration. "Your species' visual recognition systems are not calibrated to our subtle indicators. It is a limitation we anticipated." As they began the formal tour of the station, Hannah found herself fascinated by Kven's reactions to what humans would consider mundane features. He paused at every window, studying Earth below with an intensity that suggested he was memorizing every cloud formation and coastline. "Your world holds so much water," he observed, placing one long-fingered hand against the transparent aluminum. "It makes the air heavy. The humidity can be uncomfortable for species adapted to drier climates," Hannah acknowledged. "We can adjust the environmental controls further if needed." Kven turned to face her, and Hannah noticed his bioluminescent patterns had shifted to a deeper, more complex configuration. "You show considerable concern for my comfort, Officer Wright. This matches our research indicating humans place high value on physical well-being. Yet your species thrives in conditions others find challenging." "We're adaptable," Hannah replied, unable to suppress a small smile. "It's one of our better qualities." "Indeed." Kven's patterns flickered briefly. "Though your adaptability extends beyond mere physical conditions, does it not? Your species seems to form connections with remarkable ease, even across vast cultural divides." Hannah considered this. "It's true that humans tend to be social. We seek to understand others, to find common ground. Through physical proximity and contact," Kven added, his tone carrying a note Hannah couldn't quite interpret. "Our preliminary studies of human behavior found this most intriguing. Your casual touching, handshakes, embraces, even incidental contact in crowded spaces. For Zephyrians, such contact is..." He paused, searching for the right word. "Sacred." The conversation was straying into potentially sensitive cultural territory, and Hannah tried to steer it back to safer ground. "The diplomatic protocols regarding physical distance will be strictly observed during your stay. All station personnel have been thoroughly briefed." Kven's patterns shifted again, and Hannah wished she could interpret their meaning. "Your consideration is appreciated, Officer Wright. Though I admit to a certain scientific curiosity about human customs. Perhaps during my stay, you might help me understand them better." "That's part of my role as liaison," Hannah said carefully, though something in Kven's tone made her wonder if he was suggesting more than simple cultural exchange. "Shall we continue the tour?" The hydroponics bay demonstrates some of our most successful adaptations of Earth agriculture to space conditions. As they walked, Hannah noticed Gwen matching his pace perfectly to hers, maintaining exactly 4 meters of distance. Yet somehow, despite the careful space between them, she felt a growing awareness of his presence, like a static charge in the air before a storm. The rest of the tour proceeded smoothly, with Gwen showing particular interest in the station's environmental systems and the various ways humans had modified their space habitats to accommodate different species' needs. His questions were insightful, demonstrating a deep understanding of xenobiology in engineering that went well beyond diplomatic courtesy. As they reached Gwen's assigned quarters, he turned to Hannah with what she was beginning to recognize as his signature head tilt. "Officer Wright, I look forward to our future interactions. Your species continues to fascinate me in unexpected ways. I hope we can foster understanding between our peoples," Hannah replied diplomatically, though she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more meaning lurking beneath his formal words. "Understanding," Gwen repeated, his patterns creating complex swirls of light. "Yes, I believe that is what we both seek. Though perhaps not in ways either of us yet realize." As Hannah walked back to her own quarters, she found herself replaying every moment of their interaction, analyzing each word and gesture. She had prepared extensively for this assignment, studying everything known about Zephyrian culture and customs. But nothing in the briefing materials had prepared her for the reality of Gwen himself, the graceful way he moved, the mysterious patterns of light that danced across his skin, the intensity of his gaze when he spoke of human customs. She had expected this assignment to be challenging. She hadn't expected to find herself quite so intrigued by the challenges it presented, or by the enigmatic delegate she would be working with in the months to come. That night, as Hannah prepared her initial contact report, she found herself choosing her words with unusual care. How could she describe the way Gwen's presence seemed to charge the air around him? How could she explain that despite the formal distance between them, something indefinable had sparked during their first meeting? In the end, she kept her report strictly professional, detailing the tour's events and Gwen's reactions to the station's facilities. But as she lay in bed, watching Earth's lights glitter below through her quarters window, she couldn't help but wonder what other surprises this diplomatic assignment held in store. The space station hummed softly around her, its systems maintaining the careful balance of atmosphere, gravity, and temperature that kept its inhabitants alive. Somewhere, 4 decks away, Gwen was experiencing his first night on a human station, surrounded by air heavy with Earth's moisture, gravity calibrated to human comfort rather than Zephyrian standards. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for understanding, and perhaps, though Hannah wasn't ready to admit it even to herself, new possibilities she had never considered before. The first week of cultural exchange sessions had left Hannah both fascinated and frustrated. She sat across from Gwen in the station's cultural center, maintaining the careful 4-meter distance while trying to explain the concept of human greetings. "So the handshake evolved from showing empty hands, no weapons," she explained, demonstrating the motion. "Now it's a universal sign of trust and respect in many Earth cultures." Gwen's bioluminescent patterns shifted in what Hannah had learned to recognize as deep concentration. "Yet you say this gesture, so laden with meaning, is performed casually? Even between strangers?" "Often, yes." Hannah watched as Gwen's patterns rippled with what might have been disbelief. "Though there are cultures on Earth that prefer bowing or other non-contact greetings." "Fascinating." Gwen rose from his chair with fluid grace, moving to the window that looked out over Earth. "On Zephyria, physical contact is reserved for the most intimate of bonds, family units, life partners, those who have earned the right to share energy." Hannah found herself leaning forward, intrigued. "Share energy?" Gwen's patterns shifted to a configuration she hadn't seen before, swirling designs in deeper, more intense hues. "Our species evolved from beings of pure energy. Though we now inhabit physical forms, the exchange of bioelectrical energy remains sacred. Through touch, we can share emotions, memories, even fragments of consciousness." "That's incredible," Hannah breathed, momentarily forgetting her diplomatic composure. Is that why the distance protocols are so important? Yes. Kven turned to face her, and Hannah felt that familiar charge in the air between them. Casual contact would be overwhelming. Every touch carries meaning, transfers energy. To touch without purpose would be like. He searched for an analogy. Like humans sharing their deepest secrets with every stranger they pass. Hannah tried to imagine living in a world where every brush of skin against skin carried such weight. It must make diplomatic relations challenging. It does. Kven's patterns shifted again, and Hannah could have sworn they pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Though I find myself curious about the human way. Your species touches so freely, yet you still maintain the capacity for intimate connection. How do you distinguish between casual contact and meaningful touch? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to address. Hannah cleared her throat. Intent matters. Context. The same touch can mean different things depending on the relationship between people. Kven moved closer, still maintaining the prescribed distance but near enough that Hannah could see the intricate details of his patterns. Show me. Hannah's breath caught. I'm not sure that would be appropriate. For educational purposes, Kven said quickly, his patterns flickering rapidly. To better understand human customs. Perhaps we could decrease the distance protocols. Under controlled conditions. Warning bells rang in Hannah's mind, but her diplomatic training warred with her growing personal interest in Kven's request. We'd need to file multiple forms, get approval from both our governments. Of course, Kven agreed, though his patterns betrayed what Hannah thought might be disappointment. I would not suggest breaking protocol. Yet, is it not our duty to foster understanding between our species? Before Hannah could respond, the station's alert system chimed. Officer Wright, your presence is requested in the diplomatic suite. The Centaurian delegation has arrived ahead of schedule. Hannah stood, straightening her uniform. We'll continue this discussion later. I look forward to it, Kven replied, his patterns settling into something more formal. Thank you for today's lesson, Officer Wright. I find myself increasingly fascinated by human customs, and those who teach them. As Hannah hurried to meet the Centaurian delegation, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking a dangerous line. Her job was to facilitate cultural understanding, not to explore the intriguing possibilities that seemed to spark between her and Kven every time they met. But that evening, as she updated her cultural exchange logs, she found herself dwelling on Kven's questions about touch and meaning. How could she maintain professional distance when every interaction seemed to draw them closer, even with 4 meters of carefully regulated space between them? The station's systems hummed around her, maintaining their delicate balance of atmosphere and gravity. Somewhere above, Kven was probably contemplating their conversation as well, his patterns shifting with thoughts she could only guess at. Hannah closed her eyes, remembering the way his bioluminescence had pulsed when he spoke of sharing energy through touch. She was beginning to understand why Zephyrians kept their distance. Some connections were dangerous precisely because they promised to be meaningful. The diplomatic crisis struck without warning. Earth Station 1 shuddered as the damaged Zephyrian vessel crashed into the emergency docking bay, its hull crackling with residual energy from the solar storm that had nearly destroyed it. Hannah rushed to the medical bay, her heart pounding as she read the casualty reports. 27 Zephyrian crew members. All in critical condition. Including Kven. She found him separated from the others, his silvery skin dulled to an ashen gray, the usual brilliant patterns of his bioluminescence flickering weakly. The medical staff kept their distance, respecting Zephyrian protocols even in crisis. Their bioelectrical systems are severely disrupted, Dr. Patel explained, studying the readings. We can't treat them without risking energy transfer contamination. Their own healers are 8 hours away at best. Hannah watched Kven's patterns sputter like a dying light. They might not have 8 hours. She made her decision in a heartbeat, already pulling off her uniform jacket as she stepped toward Kven's bed. Dr. Patel grabbed her arm. "Officer Wright, the protocols are killing them," Hannah finished. She shook off his grip. "Kven told me Zephyrians can share energy through touch. If their systems are depleted. This isn't authorized," Patel warned. "The diplomatic implications." "File a report," Hannah said, and pressed her hand against Kven's arm. The contact was like touching a live wire. Energy coursed through her, not painful but overwhelming in its intensity. Kven's eyes snapped open, his patterns surging bright with shock. Hannah fought the urge to pull away, focusing on what Kven had told her about energy sharing being sacred to his people. Images flooded her mind, a crystalline city on Zephyria, the first sight of Earth from space, her own face seen through Kven's eyes, glowing with an inner light he found beautiful. Emotions followed, fascination, respect, longing, fear, both his and hers, mingling until she couldn't tell them apart. Kven's hand closed over hers, his touch gentler than she'd imagined. "Hannah," he whispered, his voice rough. "You break protocol. You break protocol by dying," she managed, trying to steady herself against the continuing rush of shared consciousness. "The others need help. Can we?" Kven understood. Together they moved from bed to bed, channeling energy to each critical patient. Hannah felt herself weakening with each transfer, but Kven supported her, their combined strength enough to stabilize the worst cases until the Zephyrian healers arrived. Hours later, with the crisis past and the medical bay quiet, Hannah sat in her quarters staring at her hands. She could still feel the echo of Kven's touch, still see fragments of his memories dancing behind her closed eyes. Her comm unit chimed. "Officer Wright." Admiral Torres's voice was clipped. "Report to my office immediately. The Zephyrian High Council is concerned about today's events." Hannah stood, straightening her fresh uniform. She'd known there would be consequences when she'd broken protocol. She just hadn't expected those consequences to include carrying a piece of Kven's consciousness with her, understanding finally why his people treated touch as sacred. The walk to the Admiral's office felt longer than usual. Every step reminded her of the energy still humming through her system, of the connection she'd forged that went far deeper than physical contact. She'd crossed a line today, one that couldn't be uncrossed. The strange thing was, despite the diplomatic nightmare awaiting her, despite the way her world had tilted on its axis, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. She'd seen herself through Kven's eyes, felt what he felt when he looked at her. Whatever happened next, that knowledge would stay with her. She squared her shoulders and pressed the chime for the Admiral's office. She'd broken protocol to save lives, and in doing so, had discovered why Zephyrians guarded their touch so carefully. Some connections, once formed, changed everything. The Zephyrian High Council's holographic projections loomed over the station's conference room, their patterns pulsing with agitation. Hannah stood at attention, feeling Kven's presence behind her like an electrical charge. "The protocols exist for a reason," first speaker Raval's patterns flashed warning colors. "Officer Wright's actions, while saving lives, have created an unprecedented situation. A human now carries Zephyrian energy signatures. Which proves our species can safely interact." Kven stepped forward. The exchange was successful. Officer Wright suffered no adverse effects. "You call this no adverse effect?" Second speaker Klan's patterns swirled darkly. "We can see the resonance between you. Such bonds are meant for life mates, not diplomatic liaisons." Hannah felt Kven's surge of emotion through their new connection. Defiance, protectiveness, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Admiral Torres cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should focus on the practical implications. 27 Zephyrian citizens are alive because of Officer Wright's intervention. And one human now carries classified biological information about our species," Raval countered. "Information that could be exploited." "I would never," Hannah began, but Kven's hand lifted, almost touching her shoulder before dropping away. Hannah Wright acted to preserve life, he said, using her first name deliberately. She has proven herself worthy of the trust placed in her. More than worthy. The council's patterns shifted in complex configurations. Hannah could now partially read: surprise, disapproval, curiosity. You speak from emotion, Kven, Plan observed. Your patterns betray you. My patterns speak truth, Kven replied. As do Officer Wright's actions. We came to Earth seeking understanding between our species. She has given us more than understanding, she has shown us connection is possible. Hannah felt the weight of the council's attention, their energy signatures pressing against her newly awakened senses. Through her link with Kven, she caught fragments of cultural context she'd never known, the sacred nature of energy bonds, the centuries of isolation that had shaped Zephyrian society, the fear of losing their spiritual identity through contact with other species. The council requires time to deliberate, Raval announced. Kven, you will return to Zephyria immediately for evaluation. Officer Wright will remain under observation here. No. Kven's patterns flared with an intensity that made the human officials step back. I formally request asylum under Earth jurisdiction. The conference room erupted in chaos. Hannah felt Kven's determination through their bond, matched by her own rising certainty. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, formed a connection that defied diplomatic protocol and cultural taboos alike. If Kven leaves, she addressed the council, her voice steady, I go with him. The energy bond works both ways now. You know this. The council's patterns strobed with shock. Admiral Torres pinched the bridge of his nose. Perhaps, he suggested carefully, this situation offers an opportunity. A test case for deeper integration between our species. Hours of negotiation followed. Hannah stood her ground, Kven's presence behind her a constant reminder of what they stood to lose. She felt his pride in her strength, his fear for her safety, his growing certainty that what had begun as an emergency intervention had revealed something both their species needed to understand. When the council finally withdrew to consider their options, Hannah turned to find Kven studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. You would have come with me, he said softly. Left everything you know. Yes. She didn't need their energy bond to know it was true. Would you have really claimed asylum? Yes. His patterns shifted to colors she now recognized as devotion mixed with wonder. It seems we are both willing to break protocol for what matters most. 3 months after the crisis, Hannah stood in Earth Station 1's observation deck, watching the first official Zephyrian human cultural exchange delegation arrive. Kven's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, their shared energy flowing in comfortable harmony. They're nervous, he observed, reading the patterns of his approaching people. But curious too. Like I was. The new protocols, drafted with their help, allowed for controlled contact between species under specific circumstances. The Zephyrian Council had eventually recognized that isolation would no longer serve their people's evolution. Hannah and Kven's successful bonding had opened doors no one had thought possible. Remember how you couldn't imagine casual touch? Hannah teased, leaning into his energy field. Their shared consciousness rippled with memories, his first handshake, her first experience of energy transfer, the gradual learning of each other's ways. Remember how you couldn't read patterns? Kven countered, his own glowing with the deep blues and purples of contentment. Now you speak our language better than some Zephyrians. The delegation approached, led by first speaker Raval herself. Hannah straightened, feeling Kven's pride through their bond as she greeted the visitors with perfect pattern speak, her own bio-enhanced skin glowing faintly with welcome. The pioneers of a new age, Raval acknowledged, her patterns showing approval. Your bond has taught both our peoples much. It hadn't been easy. Months of medical monitoring, diplomatic negotiations, and cultural adjustments had tested them both. Hannah had learned to handle the overwhelming input of Zephyrian energy signatures, while Kven had gradually adapted to human physical contact. Their shared consciousness had deepened, enriching rather than erasing their individual identities. "We're still learning," Hannah replied, watching the human delegation approach. Their careful distance from the Zephyrians would decrease over time, as trust and understanding grew. "Every day brings new discoveries." Kven's patterns swirled with agreement. "The Council feared we would lose ourselves through contact with other species. Instead, we have gained new ways of being, new understandings of connection." Admiral Torres joined them, nodding to the gathered diplomats. "The first joint research facility breaks ground next month. Medical, technological, and cultural exchange programs are already oversubscribed. It seems your protocol breach started quite a revolution." Hannah felt Kven's amusement through their bond. They'd become symbols of possibility, their relationship proving that differences could be bridges rather than barriers. The Zephyrian tendency toward isolation was gradually yielding to cautious curiosity about other species, while humans were learning to appreciate the sacred nature of connection that Zephyrians had always understood. Later, alone in their quarters, Hannah traced the patterns flowing across Kven's skin. "Did you ever imagine, that first day, that we'd end up here? I knew you were different," he admitted, sending her memories of their first meeting through their bond. "Your energy called to mind even then, though I didn't understand why." Their shared consciousness hummed with contentment, human touch and Zephyrian energy combining in ways that felt as natural as breathing. They'd crafted something new between them, a bridge between worlds that others could now follow. Outside their window, Earth turned slowly below the station, its lights twinkling like the patterns on Zephyrian skin. Somewhere out there, other species were watching, wondering if they too might find new ways to connect across the vast distances between stars and souls. Hannah smiled as Kven's patterns shifted to mirror her own joy. They had tried to resist this connection once, bound by protocols and fear of the unknown. But in breaking those barriers, they discovered that some bonds were worth the risk, some touches could bridge more than physical distance, and love, in all its forms, found ways to transform boundaries into bridges. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility, as humanity and Zephyrians took their first steps together into a new age of understanding. And at the heart of it all was the simple truth they discovered, that sometimes the greatest discoveries came not from resisting connection, but from embracing it with an open heart and mind.